We're finally here. It's officially time for the NFL playoffs. The teams were set last week, and we were in for a great weekend of football this Super Wildcard weekend. So without further ado, let's get right into this week's NFL recap. We started the weekend in Houston. Though it was not the only time we'd find ourselves in Texas this wildcard round, it was definitely the time with the most elated home fans. And they sure had reason to be. It was set to be a close game, however, the 5 seed versus the 4 seed. The teams had the same record in the regular season, though they both had a very different story to tell. They featured some great feel-good moments, as the Texans went from being the second worst team last year to making the playoffs with a rookie head coach and a rookie quarterback. Opposing them, definitely not a rookie quarterback, Joe Flacco, the oldest QB in the playoffs, and at some point this season he thought that his career might be over. But then the Browns needed him, and Joe led them to the playoffs with some wild gunslinging action, fit for Texas. But with that come interceptions, and that is something that can't be afforded in the playoffs. Who would come out on top? Stroud would show that he didn't have too many nerves, leading his Texans to a field goal on the opening drive. Flacco and the Browns would also drive right down the field for a touchdown, and the teams traded scores in the early going. The Texans would score one more touchdown before half to make this a 10-point game, however. But it still very much felt within reach for the Browns. They just needed their elite defense to make a stop against Stroud and the Texans in the second half, something that they had really struggled to do in the first. Instead, though, it was the Texans' defense who stepped up. The Browns were finally driving down the field, only for Flacco to throw a devastating 86-yard pick six. They then followed this up with another pick six on the very next drive to make this a 38-14 game, and it really felt like this one was over. The Texans scored another touchdown late to put the final score at 45-14, and they move on to the divisional round. Who could have predicted that at the start of the season? From the wonderful conditions inside of Energy Stadium to one of the coldest games in NFL history, the Chiefs were set to host the Dolphins at Arrowhead. The temperature hit -4 at kickoff, with the wind chill making it feel like a frosty -20. Water would freeze up in your hands as soon as you got it out of the fridge, so even the fans were in for a tough one. The Dolphins were set to thrive in conditions like this, however, with Tua never having led the Dolphins to a win in temperatures below 40, let alone -4. However, we've all seen this Chiefs team this year, and Tyreek Hill was looking for revenge, so hopefully this game would be closer than the Browns-Texans game in the early window. The Chiefs would be first to adapt to these grueling conditions, scoring an early touchdown, followed by a field goal in the second quarter, after the Chiefs' defense intercepted Tua. Hill would then make good on his promise as he scored a long touchdown to make this just a 3-point game. At this point, however, the Chiefs' field goal party would commence, with the Chiefs scoring 3 straight field goals to make this a 12-point game. A lead that this big play Dolphins offense should be able to overcome. However, in these conditions, it never really felt like it. It might as well have been a 38-14 game like in the early window, as it just did not look like the Dolphins would be getting back into this one. The Chiefs would even score another touchdown in the fourth to put the final score at 26-7. The Dolphins enter another offseason with so many questions. Is Tua the guy? Is McDaniel the guy? It seems like the Dolphins can just not get past this point, whatever they do. And after blowing their AFC East lead, questions surely have to be asked in Miami. As for the Chiefs, of course they're in the divisional round yet again, because why wouldn't they be? Even in a relatively down year with so many question marks at receiver, they are at this point in the playoffs yet again, waiting to see if they might even host a divisional round. Time for the second playoff game this weekend in Texas, featuring one of the best defenses in the NFL, that of the Dallas Cowboys. Meanwhile, on the Packers side of things, they've had one of the lesser defenses this season, giving both Baker Mayfield and Bryce Young career days. as well as letting Tommy DeVito drive right down the field in a 2-minute drill with the game on the line. What a time it was to be alive. Anyway, to be fair to Joe Barry and the Green Bay defense, they have looked pretty good in recent weeks, so let's see what they can do. Also, let's see what the Green Bay offense can do. They're the youngest team in these playoffs and the 4th youngest ever to make the playoffs. Well, if they had any nerves, they sure didn't show it here, driving right down the field to score an opening drive touchdown, having chosen to receive. All the pressure was on Dallas to respond, as it had been all week. Instead, they got just one first down before punting it away. On the next Dallas drive, Pack was back, as Jaire Alexander snagged an amazing interception. This would set Green Bay up with great field position, and Aaron Jones would take full advantage with his 2nd touchdown of the day. The next Dallas drive would stall out again, and Green Bay would score another touchdown, though their kicking woes continued, missing the PAT. The Green Bay defense would step up yet again, getting another pick, this time returning it for 6, and putting the Packers up 27-0. Dallas would finally score before half, and maybe we would see the same thing as we saw exactly 1 year ago today, where the Jaguars came back from this exact lead against the Chargers. It seemed unlikely though, as Matt LaFleur is not a master of defenses like Brandon Staley. But you never know. We soon found out it was not to be, as the Packers helped Dallas to a field goal while scoring a touchdown themselves. Yet again, it was Aaron Jones who just seemed unstoppable today. The Packers would eventually take a 48-16 lead early in the 4th quarter. Dallas would score 2 more touchdowns of their own to make this game look far closer than it really was. In the end, Jordan Love seems to be Green Bay's next franchise quarterback, as he put up identical numbers in Texas to CJ Stroud the day prior. Aaron Jones also seems to turn into the best running back in the NFL whenever he plays Dallas, putting up incredible numbers against them his entire career. The Packers remain undefeated at AT&T even now that Rodgers is gone, and have more playoff wins there than the Cowboys themselves. The Cowboys, meanwhile, are left with so many questions. How did this happen again? The Cowboys are consistently one of the best teams in the regular season, but as soon as the playoffs start, it is as if it is a completely different team, as they're not able to get anything done. Remind you of anyone? The Cowboys need to do something, as there must be something in the club culture that stops them from winning in the playoffs. Is it the pressure that the players feel to perform in the playoffs once they get there? Is it the coaching? I don't know. Whatever it is, something needs to change. The Packers move on to a team that has caused both of these franchises plenty of pain in recent years. The 49ers. On to Detroit. Let's hope we finally have a close game. The first ever playoff game at Ford Field, and who better to be the opposing quarterback than Matthew Stafford. In years prior, he was beloved here, and even on the Rams Super Bowl run, all of Detroit was rooting for Stafford. But now, it is Detroit's turn. And Stafford was not welcomed that warmly by the Lions faithful. To Detroit. The Lions would start the game off well with an opening drive touchdown. The teams would trade touchdowns, and the halftime score was finally close this weekend, 21-17. Both teams would get a field goal in the 3rd, and LA would get another in the 4th to make this just a 1-point game. The Lions would then take just 52 seconds off the clock, and it looked like Lions fans might be in for another painful playoff loss, as Stafford got the ball back with plenty of time. A 35-yard pass to who else but Puka Nacua later, and it started to look like a real possibility that LA could sneak out of here with a win. However, after a 10-yard holding penalty, the Rams moved out of field goal range and they ended up punting it away. If Detroit could get 2 first downs, the game would be over. So it all came down to this. The Detroit Lions have won a playoff game for the first time in 32 years. And they will get to host another playoff game courtesy of the Green Bay Packers. Then it was time for arguably the most predictable game of Super Wildcard weekend. After heavy snowfall in Buffalo, it was finally time for playoff football. Buffalo looked pretty dominant in the early going, forcing 2 turnovers in the first 2 quarters, and also scoring a couple touchdowns. Josh Allen also had his running shoes on again, scoring a long touchdown to make it a 21-0 game early in the second. The Bills looked to extend their lead at the end of the second quarter with a field goal. But this is when the Steelers' BS that brought them to the playoffs in the first place seemed to re-emerge. They blocked a field goal, and from the ensuing drive, the Steelers scored a touchdown, making this a 21-7 game at halftime. Game on, or so it seemed at least. The Steelers immediately forced a stop on the first drive of the second half and scored a field goal themselves. Buffalo answered with one of their own, keeping this a 2-possession game. But the very next drive was a methodical one by the Steelers, scoring yet another touchdown to make this just a 7-point game. The Bills started driving again and were soon in Steelers territory. This touchdown by Shakir then seemed to be the backbreaker for the Steelers, making it a 14-point game. Shakir broke through several tackles for the score, and it would not be the only time that night that broken tackles would lead to broken team spirit. Despite missing a field goal on their next drive, the Bills won in rather convincing fashion and set up a rematch with the Chiefs next week. They will hope to finally be able to knock them off in the playoffs, this time at home. The result also sends the Texans to Baltimore in what is sure to be an exciting game to watch. It was then time for the final game this Super Wildcard weekend. The Eagles were set to take on the Bucs in Tampa, a game that would have had most predict the Eagles to win in a blowout just a couple months ago. However, in recent weeks, as I said last week, the Eagles losing in Florida is starting to feel like a real possibility. The Bucs showed that they meant business, scoring a field goal in their first drive. They then made a stop on the Eagles' first possession and followed it up with a touchdown, 10-0 Bucs early on. After trading some field goals, the Bucs would take a 16-3 lead. The Eagles would finally properly get on the board as we were nearing the end of the second. On the PAT, however, the Bucs made a false start, so the Eagles decided to go for 2 after the penalty was enforced. This showed that it was really not going to be the Eagles' night, as the Bucs stopped them from converting the tush-push, keeping the game at 16-9 going into halftime. In the third, neither offense was really able to get anything done, as the teams just decided to punt it back and forth. Then, with just 2 minutes to go in the third, the Bucs defense really stepped up, forcing a safety. This also reinvigorated the Bucs offense, who scored another touchdown to put this game out of reach at 25-9 with just 1 quarter to go. The Bucs would add on one more statement touchdown in the fourth to put the final score at 32-9. It is incredible to see the collapse from this Eagles team at the end of the season. Although, looking back, the offense never really clicked as well as they did last season, even when they were sitting pretty at 10-1. The question is, what will the Eagles do now? It feels like this is the end of an era, with Kelsey leaving the field in tears and later confirming to his teammates that this will likely be his retirement. How can the Eagles defense turn it around next season? And what does the offense need to do to click again, the way they did last year? Meanwhile, the Bucs will be happy to move into the divisional round. So, is it time to have the discussion whether Baker is better than Brady? Although that might be a bit of an overreaction, it's awesome to see what Baker has been able to do in Tampa, with what has been his 4th team in just the last 2 seasons. Now, looking forward to next week. In the AFC, the Ravens are set to take on the Texans in what is, in my opinion, one of the most intriguing matchups of the playoffs. The Texans arguably already overachieved, and what can't CJ Stroud do? Meanwhile, the Ravens are fully rested, and Lamar is the frontrunner for MVP in what has been an extraordinary season for him. The other game will see Buffalo host the Chiefs. Mahomes Allen 3. Will Buffalo finally be able to overcome the heartbreak from previous playoff meetings with the Chiefs? On the NFC side of things, another team might be able to overcome recent playoff heartbreak. The Packers will look to finally knock off the 49ers. Would Jordan Love be able to do what Aaron Rodgers wasn't? Could he maybe set up an NFC North Championship game? As in the other game, the Lions will be hosting Baker Mayfield and the Bucks, two teams few people would have expected to make this far in the first place. But to find out what happens, check back for next week's recap of the divisional round.